I live in Omaha, Nebraska, in a bungalow off 52nd Street where trucks from the yard rumble if you leave the windows up. From the front step, I can see a sliver of the skyline between cottonwoods, and on still nights I hear a horn from the river bridge. I'm 43, divorced, a locomotive engineer for the railroad that keeps this town's heartbeat regular, eastbound stacks, westbound grain. My son, Luke, is 12, lives with his mom in Bellevue, and can tell a GE from an EMD by sound. People say I drive the train like it's a pickup. The cab is its own planet. The seat is bolted to steel that vibrates into your shins. The alerter pings every so often to make sure you haven't drifted into the dream where you're not a sequence of procedures. There's the throttle 8 notches like rungs, the automatic and the independent brake, the horn lever that must speak at every crossing. 2 long, 1 short, 1 long. The country's strangest anthem. The morning it happened, late February, sky the color of a nickel. We were hauling empties east out of Lincoln, headed for Council Bluffs. Empties ride jumpy. You see Creighton blow it in the 4th? My conductor, Rios, asked, boots up on the heater grate. I said we had bigger problems, like the blind crossing west of Wahoo where the sightlines are bad. Raised roadbed, cornstalks like stubble, a stand of cedar that refuses to retire. A mile out, I started the pattern. 2 long, 1 short, 1 long. Rios called the crossing number into the radio. I eased the throttle to notch 3 and kept a palm on the automatic the way a man keeps a leash. The car appeared the way trouble does. Sudden, ordinary. A silver sedan nosed up the gravel, paused at the line while the lights did their red dance, and then crept forward as if the tracks were a rumor. Steel calculates. At 52 miles an hour with empties behind you, you are a math problem that does not care if a driver changes their mind. I dumped the air, big red handle, full emergency, and felt weight surge forward, slack yanking, couplers stretching. The horn vibrated into my arm. The sedan didn't back up. It didn't gun it. It simply committed to a bad idea with the bravery of someone who has been lucky before. The impact wasn't a movie. It was a hard, dull shove followed by a judder through the consist, like the train itself winced. The windshield took a spray of dust. Then the strange quiet the world makes when the loudest thing has just finished happening. We came to a stop 3/4 of a mile past the crossing, brakes howling. There is a checklist for this. Secure the train. Radio the dispatcher. Protect the head end. Breathe. Rios was already on the ground with the vest and fusees. I climbed down on legs that didn't feel like legs. At the crossing, gravel told the story we already knew. The sedan lay in the ditch, crushed into a shape Detroit never imagined. An airbag sagged like a collapsed jellyfish. A bag of oranges had spilled, the fruit bright against February mud. I knelt because kneeling is a reflex and touched her wrist because touching is how my hands ask questions my mouth can't. Rios did the words we are trained to do. I said the other ones, I'm sorry. Though sorry is a word with no throttle. Behind us the engine idled, a beast that wanted only to get back to doing what it knows, move. I stared at the crossbucks, the lights still flashing their useless truth, and understood there are speeds the past travels that the future cannot catch. The sheriff's deputies came with the volunteer fire crew, then railroad police, then a man with a clipboard whose job is turning awful into boxes. They took our statements by the hood of a truck. I spoke slowly, as if careful syllables could rewind steel. They paced off distances that feel like insults, bagged the oranges because even ordinary becomes evidence. A trooper asked if I'd been on my phone. I held up the railroad brick and said they take your personal phone if it even thinks you're lonely. He smiled like he was required to, then asked when I last slept. I answered the way the rulebook wants because I had. By the time another crew took the power, my hands had stopped shaking but my jaw hadn't. Back in Omaha, I parked and sat until the windshield fogged and cleared twice. There was a note on my door from my neighbor, garage lights out again. And that tiny normal thing made me cry. In the morning my manager used phrases like critical incident and employee assistance. I drove to the yard anyway because my body believes a day has started only if I touch steel. Guys looked at me and then away. Rios squeezed my shoulder, hard enough to remind me I am attached to bones. It wasn't you, he said, the sentence good men use when they're out of other tools. A road foreman took my badge for the week and offered a counselor's number. I put it in my pocket and pretended that meant I would use it. Sleep rewrote itself. I jolted awake to an alerter that wasn't there. I stopped at crossings even on foot. When I closed my eyes, the sedan committed in slow motion and then again faster, and in both versions I did the same things and got the same result. Luke called to brag about a base hit. I told him I was proud in a voice that didn't sound like mine. After we hung up, I drove to the crossing and stood on the ballast with my hands in my jacket like a man waiting for a bus in the wrong town. Someone had left flowers. A bough tapped the post like a finger asking the world to answer back. The counselor met me in a room with a rug that tried too hard. She called it intrusive, the way the scene arrived while I rinsed a plate or pulled a shirt over my head. "You pulled the horn, you dumped the air," she said. "The rest is math." I told her math kills people every day. She didn't argue. She gave me exercises that felt like cheating at breathing but helped. 5 things I can see, 4 I can feel, 3 I can hear. That night I slept 4 hours without dreaming. A week later, the railroad investigator said the cameras had my horn pattern, the logger had my speed, the gates and lights worked. The driver had gone around them. "You are cleared," he said. "Cleared is for storms, not people." I re-rode with a road foreman in the right-hand seat. Every crossing looked like a dare. The first time I eased the horn lever, my hand shook so hard the note wobbled. After the trip, he wrote "satisfactory" in a box that has no room for what I wanted to put there. I did the job while carrying the weight of doing the job. On days off, I started speaking at driver's ed with Operation Lifesaver. I told 16-year-olds the numbers: train length, stopping distance, horn sequence, the way steel wins arguments. I told them about luck and how it runs out. I didn't tell them about oranges. I carried one in my coat pocket anyway. A talisman I couldn't explain even to myself. I took a month of FMLA because the counselor said grief is a job and it doesn't pay overtime. I told myself I would fix the sagging fence, change the oil. Mostly I walked. I followed the old belt line trail until it ran out at a chain link fence and then stood there waiting for the rest of the map. On Saturdays, Luke and I built a layout on a sheet of plywood in the garage. A loop, a siding, a little depot we painted blue. He ran the HO engines too fast, made heroic crashes, then rebuilt the town in 5 minutes. Kids know how to live with wreckage better than adults. They don't argue about what the world owes them before they get back to work. 2 weeks in, a lawyer mailed a notice the company would handle. That night, Rios texted an address and a time. "Peer group," he wrote. In a church basement, 6 engineers and 2 conductors sat in a circle of metal chairs. A man with a handlebar mustache said, "Welcome to the club nobody volunteers for," and then told us about the minivan at a rural crossing near Kearney and how wind still wakes him. One by one we said our versions. Nobody tried to fix anything. It was like setting down a heavy box and discovering a floor that would hold it. When the railroad called me in for the simulator, my stomach went hot. The room was dark, the desk pretending to be a cab. The screen threw Nebraska at me, track, elevators, crossings. The first scenario was routine. The second threw a truck that stopped and then reversed. My hands hovered over controls. I could run asleep and felt new again. In the third, a car cheated the gate and made it. The machine was teaching me the thing my body didn't believe. Sometimes the story doesn't end the way your nerves expect. I went back in the seat in late spring. The air had that clean, wet smell the river gets when the ice finally gives up. Rios swung up into the cab with a grin that tried to be regular and asked if I'd brought decent coffee. I had. Out past Gretna. Every crossing felt like the first time you say your kid's name in a crowd. Something could go wrong and probably won't. At Ashland, a pickup stopped and the driver waved. I waved back, a dumb human thing. We finished the trip without incident and I sat in my truck afterward with my hands on the wheel like a man finishing a prayer. At a summer driver's ed session, a man stood up after my talk and said he was her father. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He asked me to tell the kids one more time that the horn is not a negotiation, that the gates are not suggestions, that a train isn't a moral test you can pass by squeaking through. I told them again, voice shaking, and when I finished, the father reached for my hand. His grip was ordinary. "Thank you for stopping," he said. A sentence that landed in my chest and sat there like a stone and somehow also like a key. That night, I put the orange on the counter and cut it open. Luke and I ate the wedges leaning over the sink, juice running down our wrists, not saying anything that needed to be said. I threw the peel away and kept the habit of checking my pockets anyway. Rituals outlast their reasons. Maybe that's what makes them work. In August, the railroad asked for volunteers to help install new signage at county crossings. Bigger stop lines, fresh paint, reflective tape on the backs of crossbucks. I signed up because a tool in my hand makes sense in a way paperwork never will. Out by Uton, a farmer waved. "People think they can outguess you," he said, and I said, "Not me. Physics." I took Luke to the yard museum and let him climb into an old GP9. He ran his hands over the worn throttle. He asked if we could blow the horn, and I said the city wouldn't love that, so we did it with our mouths. 2 long, 1 short, 1 long. On the drive home, I made him promise that when he learns to drive, he'll stop, look, listen, and then do it again. He rolled his eyes and said, "I promise," careful and slow. In September, I stocked a first-on-scene kit in my truck. Outside Valley one night, 2 teenagers had a pickup stalled on the near rail. We shoved it clear, and 30 seconds later a local roared through. They laughed with the leftover fear, and I told them to remember the words, "We got lucky." Back at work, I mentored a new hire through a winter night. We talked black ice, earplugs, and how the alerter can feel like judgment or mercy. I gave him the only advice I own: do the right things in order and let the math do what it will. On the anniversary, I drove to the crossing. The ditch had swallowed last year's grief and given back grass. Someone had tied a new ribbon to the post. It flicked in the wind. I stood there and named the parts: rail, ties, ballast, crossbuck. A grain train went through at 40 and the ground shook the clean, honest way steel does. I let the horn pass through me without flinching. Then I went home and made spaghetti, oversauced like always, and fed Luke. I still wake with the taste of ozone, like memory is weather. When that happens, I sit on the edge of the bed, count 5 things I can see, 4 I can feel, 3 I can hear. I say names out loud. I make coffee and write the date on a sticky note so I don't lose the day to a loop. On good mornings, Luke beats me to the kitchen whistling. He says it isn't the horn pattern. I let him pretend. I am not better. I am different, like a new joint after a break. Weather smart, clicking now and then, stronger where it healed. I am a man in Omaha who runs trains and tells teenagers to wait 20 seconds that might give them 50 years. I carry a vest, a flashlight, and an orange in the glove box, superstition and reminder. When I ease the horn lever at a blind crossing west of Wahoo, I breathe, I do the right things in order, and then I trust the math and let steel do what steel does, move us from one milepost to the next.